I went out for a routine night shift and heard the most fragile, frightened sound tangled in the undergrowth. What I pulled out of that net changed everything I thought I knew about rescue and trust. My name is Lena Morno. I am 32, and for the past 7 years I've been volunteering on the reserve's night patrols. I started because of a lost dog named Milo, and because of the way silence can hollow a person out if you let it. There are old scars you see and old scars you don't. Mine are both. On paper, I was an ecologist, a volunteer with a simple checklist and a headlamp. In practice, I was someone who listened for small things other people missed. The reserve sits like a bruise on the edge of the town, windswept and wedge-shaped, a handful of scrub and reed and salt-bent grass between the river and the old marsh. Dusk here doesn't just arrive, it knees you down, folding the sky into one long gray room. The day shift leaves a neat trail of activity, ticks on clipboards, radios clicked off, and then the night settles like a patient animal that waits to see what you're going to do. That evening, the wind had teeth. It drove salt across my cheeks and rattled the bins at the ranger station. I had finished my rounds, checked the fences and the bird boxes, flagged the usual signs of fox or badger, and was about to radio the main gate when I heard it, a tiny, pinprick sound like a heart tapping against a tin can. It's funny how in the dark certain noises take on the heft of decisions. You either follow them or you let them dissolve into the wind. I followed. My headlamp carved a tunnel through the dusk, catching the outlines of saltgrass, the glint of webbing, and then a mass of black twine hunched against a bramble. It wasn't fishing net exactly. It looked like the remains of a garden net or a stray cargo wrap, stiff with salt and pulled into knots by weather and whatever small animals had found it. There was the ache of abandonment about it, like something someone had left and decided wasn't worth retrieving. As I crouched, the sound came again, closer, thinner, a frightened thread rather than a call, and I saw movement, a flash of roundness and a pair of eyes that reflected my lamp like tiny moons. It was smaller than I expected, no bigger than my hand when it spread its feathers, more fragile than the word owl carries in people's minds. Feathers damp with the day's mist, plastered to a body that trembled like a violin string. The net had gathered around it in loops, binding a wing to its side and catching a talon in a cruel, patient knot. My breath went quiet. Everything else in the world was the wind and the sound it couldn't smother. I remember the exact way my fingers shook as I reached in, old scar tissue around my knuckles stiff as if remembering other nights. I speak gently to animals when they're frightened. It's something I learned after Milo, because the right tone can be a small anchor. The owl watched each of my movements with a kind of wary intelligence. It didn't thrash or bite. It simply pulsed with the question of whether I was the next danger or the next salvation. I worked slowly, pulling the webbing apart with a pocket knife in my hands, careful not to cut skin or feather. Salt made the knot stiff, grit snagged on feathers, the world reduced to the edge of the net and the tiny animal breathing under my palms. At one point, its whole body shuddered and I feared it would tear, but it didn't. It leaned its head into my wrist as if testing the temperature of my skin. There is a strange currency in those moments where a wild thing chooses you. It feels like trust and responsibility in equal, heavy measures. I freed the talon first, easing the loop until the claw slipped out with a soft, reluctant click, then worked the wing free so the feathers fanned like a small, shocked flag. For a heartbeat, the owl crouched, then it did something I did not expect. Instead of launching into the dark, it folded itself into my hands and closed its eyes. They were not sleepy eyes, they were trusting eyes, surrender in a form so small it almost made my chest ache. I was still untangling when I felt it, a thin band around one leg, tucked into the feathers like a secret. I don't often find human things on animals here. On this tiny body lay something deliberate. I brushed it loose and my fingers closed on cold metal, a ring, not jewelry but a band, stamped with a number and worn almost smooth. At that exact second, the wind dropped, the reserve holding its breath with me, and somewhere in the marsh a reed snapped like a distant footfall. I looked at the band and at the owl, and for the first time since Milo's last day, something hot and complicated rose in my throat, curiosity wrapped in fear, wrapped in a thread of hope. I had come for small rescues and small consolations. I had not expected an object that carried a story. I cupped the owl to my chest, feeling the faint beating of wings against the fabric of my jacket, and started back toward the ranger hut, aware that whatever this band meant, the night had just become less simple. The hut smelled of coffee and antiseptic, the radio a dark pad on the table, but my fingers could not stop tracing the digits on that tiny band because some part of me recognized the shape of an old question I had. I cradle the owl against my chest and the tiny thing weighs less than my palm, its heart hammering under my hand like a trapped moth. The shelter's back gate clangs shut behind me and the world narrows to the hush of the tide, the rust of nylon under my fingernails, the wet, salt smell in the air. I tear at the last twisted knot until my thumb throbs, until at last the net slides free and the bird unfurls in a shuddering, ragged breath that sounds impossibly loud in the quiet. For a second it seems like everything that could have gone wrong did. A wing bent at the wrong angle, a slit of raw skin feathering out from under the dirt, a slick of grime along its chest that makes my stomach flip. I expect it to bolt or to cry out, but instead it folds into me like it has nowhere else to go. There is a small iron ring on its leg, half buried in feathers, pinched by the net at some earlier point. I hadn't noticed it while I was cutting, focused only on the work. Only on freeing warm life from suffocation, but there it is now, a tiny disc stamped with numbers and a faded triangular logo that looks nothing like the bird-bending tags I'd seen in local rehab manuals. The digits are worn but legible, 241 echo. A shallow burn mark scars the left shoulder feathers, a pale crescent, as if it had brushed something too hot. The knot pattern in the net is not fisherman's weave. The loops are angular, stitched almost like a braid, reinforced in places with a different filament. Someone manufactured this to hold, not to catch by accident. I wrap the owl in the shelter's spare towel, old but clean from the supply cabinet, and feel its tiny claws relax on my shirt. Its eyes are closed, but it makes a thin, methodical huffing sound like a person trying not to cry out. My first move is professional reflex. Keep it warm, keep it calm, get to a rehab vet. The road to the center is 3 towns over, and the on-call number rings into an answering voice instructing me to bring the animal to the emergency drop-in. I look at the bird, at the metal tag that gleams like a secret, and decide I can't leave it here to the open nighttime drive with the owl cradled against my chest, the towel tucked under my arm so it won't slide as I turn. The radio is low, the beams throw long, unfamiliar shadows through the trees. My palms know every pothole on this road by touch, but tonight the map feels wrong, like an old photograph with a fold down the middle. I talk to it in a whisper because not talking seems like failure. You're okay, and it makes a small noise that sounds almost like a consonant. It is impossible not to look for meaning where there may be none. At my little flat, I set up a shoebox lined with more towels on the kitchen table beneath the radiator where the heat gathers. I lay the owl inside, peel a smear of grime from its forehead with a damp cloth, and find feathers that don't match the birds I rescue every season. The pattern is too precise, an almost geometric banding like someone painted tiny chevrons along the flanks. Under the kitchen light, the faint burn looks like an emblem. I cup my hand around the ring and the number again to memorize it. 241 echo. The letters echo in my head as if the night had swallowed their sound and spat it back. Salted dot. It sleeps with a little whimper that could be wind. I brew tea because my hands shake, and I used to think tea fixed everything. The owl wakes and tilts its head at the sound of the kettle, big eyes opening like dark coins. For a second it looks straight at me, and I feel that impossible tether, that helpless, widening recognition that says neither of us will ever be the same. It leans forward and taps my knuckle with its beak, a light, almost imploring gesture, and I understand in a single, animal way that something in this bird is not purely wild. I have a laptop because everyone does, and because I've learned that anything you need to know about a strange tag is out there somewhere. The rehab center told me to bring the bird in, and I plan to in the morning, but curiosity is a warm, corrosive thing. I take pictures of the ring, the burn, the feather bands. The flash catches the logo and brightens the engraved triangle in a way my eyes did not. I type the digits into a search bar and hold my breath. The first hits are nothing, field studies, hobbyist banding catalogs, an old forum thread about a pigeon tagging system, but then a hit appears that makes my stomach go cold. A dusty PDF from a nonprofit in a coastal country 2,000 miles away, archived like a relic. The document lists an experimental nocturnal tracking project marked Echo and a mention of numbered tags. There are no photos, only scientific jargon and a tone like someone trying to sound both careful and proud. It speaks of migration patterns, of releasing rehabilitated owls to bolster dwindling colonies, and of cross-border partnerships that brought birds from far distances in cargo holds and crates. I read the lines twice, the words blur. Could this tiny, trembling thing have been part of something so far away? The idea feels both enormous and ridiculous, like a story someone would make up on a storm night, until I scroll down and find a footnote. A contact address that does not match any local organization but names a private contractor with a logistics license, and a half-hidden phone number that carries an unfamiliar international code. My phone vibrates. It's a number with no country code, just a short string of digits and an unknown identifier that makes my teeth ache with worry. I consider ignoring it because unknown calls at midnight always mean trouble, but the display blinks insistently. My thumb shakes as I accept. A voice, smooth and clipped, asks without preamble, "Did you find it?" The word it lingers in the dark like a presence. I say yes, it's here, it's hurt. My voice sounds thin. The caller waits like a person who has been rehearsing lines for a long time. We need to know where, they say finally. Please tell me exactly where. A line like a hook tugs at the back of my neck. Why do they want to know where I found a tiny bird? My head fills with images I cannot trust. Nets full of birds, someone waiting in a truck, a clandestine operation that turns living creatures into parcels. It was down by the East Jetty, I say, and the words feel small in my mouth. The voice climbs a fraction, interested but not surprised. You should not move it. We have protocols. Where did you get the sample from? The ring? Did you contact a rehab? I think of the ring stamped 241 Echo like a brand. I think of the burn, the odd knot pattern. My memory pulls at a half-remembered slogan from my training. When in doubt, preserve evidence. I don't know what it is, I say. I was about to take it to the center in the morning. There is a pause, then the faint shuffling of paper, a breath. Please don't post photos or call anyone else. We will arrange for collection in the morning. Keep it somewhere warm and quiet. No one else should know. The voice is not unkind, but it has the authority of a door closing. It gives a time window and a short, careful set of instructions that imply resources I do not have. A vehicle with a placard, a technician in a marked jacket, a permit number that sounds official. After the call ends, the kitchen hums like a place that has been made small around a danger. I look at the owl sleeping, at the tiny ring that made all of this possible. My chest tightens with a responsibility that refuses to be shared. Who are you? I whisper to the towel. The bird flutters awake and peers up at me, righting its head with a sudden, unnervingly attentive focus, as if listening for something the night keeps secret. I tuck the laptop away and pull a blanket over the box. My apology to the owl is a simple thing. I will not hand you over to strangers without knowing why. I tell myself there is time until morning, but outside, the tide pulls and pushes like a giant, breathing, slow and indifferent. The ring's numbers sit in my mind like coordinates. The dojared PDF from 2,000 miles away feels both impossibly far and unnervingly close. Then, before sleep can happen, there's another sound: tires on gravel. Headlights wash the curtains. I freeze, all the air gone, and hear the scrape of a footstep on the porch. The dog next door begins to bark, unsure and nervous. The owl makes a tiny, piercing call, and in that single note I hear resolve and warning. The knock at the door is deliberate, measured. Someone is outside, and they know something about the night I don't. The officer's skepticism lasted only until the microchip reader on his desk hummed and spat out a string of numbers. At first it looked like a routine registration, but the address attached to the code pointed to a private property 3 counties away. I felt the room tilt when the name appeared: Elias Hart. He was the man who taught us how to cradle broken wings, who lent gear and nodded approvingly at our first rescues. The tiny stitches on the net's soft pad, which I had noticed while nursing the owl, matched a pattern in his ledger. We could have let it go, an inconvenient coincidence, but we did not. The officer, at first reluctant, dug through permits, bank transfers, and the neat labels in the file. Patterns emerged: nets bearing the same microscopic stitching, birds missing from neighboring states, and a ledger that read more like inventory than research. Each discovery felt like another thread being pulled free. The tiny owl in my lap watched with bright, appraising eyes, unaware that its presence would change everything. We obtained a warrant after compiling evidence that left no legal wiggle room. The night of the raid smelled of wet hay and adrenaline. Flashlights cut through the dark as our convoy crept toward a barn that had once felt like sanctuary. Hands that had taught me how to calm an injured raptor were the very hands that now hesitated as the door was thrown open. Inside, dozens of birds shivered in cages, a chorus of wings and uncertain hoots. Labels nailed to perches matched the shorthand in the ledger, and tiny stitch codes tucked into nesting pads matched the one on the net that had trapped our owl. It was methodical, almost businesslike. Birds inventoried and moved like stock. Elias stood in the doorway, his calm smile faltering as accusations filled the rafters. He spoke of research, of conservation, of licenses and paperwork. His explanations were smooth, but the documents did not support his story. The officer read aloud passages from the ledger, each line a small hammer that chipped away at the facade. Volunteers who had trained under Elias stepped forward, eyes reddened, and a network of sanctuaries and advocates mobilized. The rescue that night felt like both reckoning and release. Cages emptied, carriers were filled, and a long list of birds began the slow journey toward rehabilitation and legitimate placement. I carried our little owl through the chaos, feeling oddly like an anchor, and whispered to it as I always had. Its small heartbeat against my palm steadied me. The fallout moved faster than I expected. News crews circled, social feeds filled with footage of empty perches and open records. Prosecutors built a case from microchip reads, shipping manifests, and the ledger's stark entries. Elias was removed from the community he had once led, and the handlers who enabled the operation faced scrutiny. For me, the unraveling of a mentor cut deeper than I expected, leaving a hollow where trust had lived. The rehabilitation center became a hub for recovery. Birds were examined, fed, and taught again how to hunt or orient themselves. Volunteers who had once felt betrayed returned to the work, and little successes, a wing regained, a flight attempted, a call answered, stitched the community back together. The tiny owl learned to trust hands again, and its recovery became part of the evidence that saved the case. Months later, after depositions, court dates, and hearings, the center quieted. Elias' trial and the sentencing of accomplices had made headlines, and the animals had begun finding homes or placements with trusted sanctuaries. One ordinary afternoon, months after the raid, I stood at my kitchen window when a small shadow arrived on the sill. The bird cocked its head and fixed me with eyes I had seen before. It was not exactly the same owl I had found. Time and trials leave marks. Yet a faint trim on a wing and a small scar on its toe matched our records. It settled on the latch unruffled and seemed to register the room, the life, and perhaps the person who had first reached for it. I opened the window. It did not leave. It perched like a small badge of what we had accomplished. People asked if I forgave myself for not noticing sooner, for trusting the wrong person. The answer was complicated. I grieved the loss of an easy certainty but found solace in action. That small owl returning to my sill felt like a benediction, a simple proof that what we had done mattered. It reminded me that courage need not be loud and compassion need not be grand. The twist of this story, if you can call it that, was that the darkness we illuminated lived close in the same hands that once taught us. Exposing it required nothing more exotic than noticing a coded stitch, keeping records, and choosing not to walk away. The tiny owl was both victim and witness, and in court its markings helped close a loop that might otherwise have stayed open. On mornings when the world feels heavy, I think of that small bird in the ledger and how tiny actions can ripple. The owl taught me that kindness coupled with curiosity is a force that unmasks wrongdoing and restores life. It came back months later to perch on my sill and look at me in a way that said nothing and said everything. We did it. And that is the miracle. Let it stand as proof that quiet courage matters, that saving a single small life can unravel a larger wrong, and that compassion combined with attention to detail often becomes the strongest kind of justice. The owl's return was a small benediction, a silent nod toward everyone who chose to notice, to follow a thread, to refuse the easy silence. One action can open cages, change names on ledgers, and set a chorus of wings free to fly again, stronger today.